The late 90s and early 2000s had some of my favorite video games of all time. Final Fantasy VII, Pokemon Crystal, and Mega Man Legends, to name a few. But out of the countless games that release every year, only some are considered to be highly influential. Games that go on to influence many games into the future in any number of ways. Shenmue is one such game.
I'm looking for some sailors.
Releasing on the Sega Dreamcast in 1999 in Japan and 2000 in North America and Europe, the game wasn't as big as Sega had hoped it would be. The Dreamcast was doing well when it first launched, but then, as the titan presence that is the PlayStation 2 was looming over the horizon, sales for Sega's latest and greatest hardware started to slow. Sega was doing all it could to show off how great the Dreamcast was. The first console to include a built-in internet modem, the extremely intriguing Virtual Memory Unit, or VMU, and an absolutely stellar lineup of launch games. But even with all of that at the forefront, the PlayStation 1 did so well, people looked past Sega and right into the jaws of the PS2. One of the things Sega tried to do to help sell their Dreamcast was to make the best games they could, ones that would not only utilize the Dreamcast to its fullest extent, but have word of mouth from customers to help sell the hardware and software. Sega ended up taking a lot of gambles during both the previous console generation with the Sega Saturn, as well as the Dreamcast. One such gamble was a video game made by some of their best talent. Helmed by Yu Suzuki of arcade and Virtua Fighter fame, they went on to spend an alleged $70 million to create the video game Shenmue. What was the most expensive game ever made up to that point, Shenmue was being made to be that console seller that Sega was dreaming of. Something to make the needle point up, rather than down in the face of the oncoming competition. Shenmue, with a lot of Sega's hopes and dreams on the line, finally released, and it did so to critical success, but not so much commercial. While Shenmue released in Japan before the PS2 launched there, North America and Europe both got the PS2 before they did Shenmue. Selling about 1.2 million copies, according to Wikipedia, it did not make back its development costs, and just a few short months later, Sega had announced it was withdrawing from the hardware business entirely. God, I would love to peek into the alternate universe where Sega survived that generation. But anyway, since the Dreamcast didn't last long enough for Shenmue 2, it instead released on the original Xbox in North America and Europe, though Europe also got Shenmue 2 on Dreamcast, so they have two different versions of the game. Lucky punks. I saw online that Sega had some sort of 11-game deal with Xbox after they dropped the race, Shenmue 2 being one such game. Fast forward to 2018, and we got a remastered game containing both Shenmues 1 and 2. That released before Shenmue 3 the following year. But with me lacking an original Xbox, this remaster is what I ended up playing through for this video. After I had played through Shenmue 1, and having really enjoyed that game, I wondered just how the sequel was going to follow that up. I was not prepared. As it turns out, I loved Shenmue 2. It's not just a great follow-up to the first game, but it also brings a lot of new stuff to the table. And I finally found out what a Shenmue is. But speaking of Shenmue 2, let's hop right into this video proper. Hi there, my name is MegaMadVlad, and this here is a video about Shenmue 2. Go figure. So I figure, what better way to start talking about a video game than by starting with what makes a game unique? The gameplay. Shenmue 2 takes almost every aspect from its predecessor and either updates it or puts its own spin on it. Stuff like traveling the world, combat, minigames, talking with NPCs, and the like. This basically gives Shenmue 2 a similar feeling and vibe to its predecessor, but it also has its own unique aspects to it. Shenmue 2 feels like both a follow-up to the first game, but also unique in how it molds itself through the same format the first game had. Let's start with the world. Back in Shenmue 1, we had access to 5 different zones that Ryo could travel to. In Shenmue 2, however, you have, if I counted it correctly, 11 zones in Hong Kong. That's more than double the amount of zones from the first game. And that's just the first map of the game. Oh, there are 2 more maps, each with many zones themselves. Basically, Shenmue 2's world is much bigger than the first game. This does come with both upsides and downsides to it though. The upsides being that, with Hong Kong as an example, Ryo is heading to a big city, a location that's supposed to be much bigger than, I'm probably gonna butcher this, but Yokosuka from the first game. And to be fair, we technically don't even visit the whole of Hong Kong either. We're just in a major district called Wan Chai, and only Wan Chai. But even just being a single major district, it's already much bigger than the whole map of Shenmue 1, which is honestly crazy to think. There's so much to see, so many zones and buildings to go to, and many more people to talk to, many different activities as well that you can do. It feels like a big bustling city. Well, as much as was possible on early 2000s hardware. But some downsides do come with the bigger city as well. For one thing, they give you the option to purchase a map for each zone that you go to. It essentially gives you a mini-map at the bottom left corner of your screen, and if you go to your inventory, you can see an overall map of Wan Chai. So, why is having a map a bad thing, you ask? Well, it almost feels like a necessary evil in some cases to me. You see, in Shenmue 1, Yokosuka was small enough to not require a map of sorts to navigate. Sure, you have access to those maps on the sides of streets, but having a mini-map almost takes you out of the immersion more. Not to mention, I did find myself looking at the map far more often than actually learning which zones were connected to each other and how. Not to mention, just what buildings were in the areas. With enough time in the city, I have no doubt that you can learn it by heart, but adding in the minimap gives less incentive to do so. Another downside is that, rather than the first game giving every NPC a schedule that they play off of, in Hong Kong, there were so many NPCs who were just there to walk around. If they had schedules as well, it was nowhere near as noticeable. So with a bigger game, it does come with some trade-offs, and even with the changes, it still feels like Shenmue. I would argue that being used to Yokosuka and getting lost in Hong Kong is a true-to-life kind of experience. But as far as locations go, there are 3 of them. The Wan Chai district in Hong Kong, another city called Kowloon, and another place you get to via boat called Guilin. Each location has a different atmosphere, theme, and reason that Ryo visits them. For Hong Kong, Ryo just arrives in China on his search for Land D. But like I said before, Hong Kong is large, with big skyscrapers, and a lot of hustle and bustle from the many, many NPCs. Even without seeing all of the NPCs running on their own schedules, it still feels like a living and breathing world to explore. And a lot of zones are tied to the narrative in a variety of different ways. Each zone is labeled by a district name, and it's clear the developers tried to make them unique from one another. This is mostly just a cityscape, so you might see a lot of stuff that looks kind of samey. It's a lot of buildings, but even with that, the devs ended up doing a lot to make each zone look unique in one way or another. Like, some stores have boxes hanging out in the road, a water fountain next to the ocean in the workers' pier, or even a straight-up martial arts dojo. There are a lot of notable locations and landmarks that can help you traverse Hong Kong, and you even have a minimap now. This is essentially the first location for Ryo to explore. Wan Chai feels like a working and shopping area. You'll see NPCs doing a lot of different things, from walking around, working, entering and exiting shops, doing arm wrestling competitions, and so on. It's a unique welcome to China style experience for the next stretch of Ryo's journey, and also the start of his hunt for Land D. But once you leave Hong Kong, you'll find yourself in Kowloon, an arguably just as famous location as Hong Kong, as you see those impossibly high, run-down looking buildings with many different balconies. It's got a lot of personality to it that's become famous in movies and pictures from photographers. And it does have a lower income type of vibe to it, especially with the dilapidated building interiors you come across. And these buildings are big. You can explore so many floors, and some floors have full-on shopping centers in them. It's like a straight-up mini community. But when you actually get around to exploring, you'll find that the NPCs are much more invested in the combat scene, finding various spots that have combat arenas, all with a different style of fighting challenge. And it's really cool to just walk up and see a fight going on that you can just watch before partaking yourself. And you'll find so many of these throughout Kowloon. But we'll talk about those in a bit, because Kowloon feels more run down. It also feels like you can be attacked at any time. It has a more cutthroat atmosphere to it. Kowloon is also when the story does pick up more, which is likely why combat is a bit more focused on here. A welcome addition to the series in my opinion. And finally, after Kowloon comes Guilin, a different region in China that's mostly forest and mountains. It's nothing like what we've experienced before, not in Hong Kong or Kowloon, and certainly not in Shenmue 1. Guilin is mostly about nature, walking through it, and the journey to Ryo's next destination in the region. Something that's narrative related, so I'll skip talking about that here, but it really comes down to just being a journey from point A to point B. While there are quite a few zone changes in Guilin, you don't get a map of any sort. and this is all leading to the end of the game anyway. Not like you're really going back anyway. But now the vibe is more uplifting. It's sunny. The foliage and water shimmer in the sunlight, all while Rio walks on the only path forward. No combat in sight, so it's more of a good way to wind down after a very action-packed Kowloon. And that's the 3 different locations in a nutshell. While Hong Kong itself is far bigger than Shenmue 1 by itself, once you add in the other 2 locations of Kowloon and Guilin, respectively, this game is much bigger than its predecessor. With so much to do alongside the main story, you'll find yourself busy with just about whatever you want, all while the sights change over time. But now, let's talk about the things you can do in these locations. Aside from Guilin being mostly just a pathway forward, both Hong Kong and Kowloon have plenty to do. In Hong Kong, likely one of the first things you'll come across is an arm wrestling competition. There are plenty of these spread throughout the game, but there are a few in the Workers' Pier here alone. These competitions are a minigame that will require you to button mash your way to victory, all while you have money on the line. If you beat them, you win double your money, and then you get asked if you want to do it again, but for $10 more. Each time you win, the money bet goes up, and the tougher the minigame becomes. You can end up straight up losing right out the gate if you don't mash the button fast enough, or even if you go too early. 3 early starts and you lose, but when the match ends up taking a while, you'll even get quick time event moments that, if you win, will push Rio a bit further toward winning. Fail, and it gets harder. But these matches are a quick way to make money in the game, as long as you win anyway. While there are quite a few people you can arm wrestle in the game, between both Hong Kong and Kowloon, they all start at different bet amounts. Some start at $10, whereas you might come across someone starting at $30. Win enough rounds against them, and you can't challenge them anymore. And this is just one minigame in Shenmue 2. It has quite a lot of depth, and certainly a ton of challenge to it. So much so, I wouldn't blame anyone for using a turbo controller just to supplement the button mashing. Gambling is also another great way to make money in Shenmue 2. You have a couple different mini-games for this one, so buckle in. The first one I want to talk about is a game called Lucky Hit. It's basically a big board with a lot of nails in it. You pick a spot at the top of the board and drop a ball. The ball will fall down, hitting each of the pins, and the goal is to hope it lands in a spot on the bottom of the board that you want it to land on. It's pretty much that simple to play, but boy is it tough. And RNG is absolutely a factor here. I've dropped a ball in the exact same spot plenty of times, and it still ends up going wherever it wants. There is no true win spot here. There are so many different boards throughout the game to play on, and they all have different prizes and games to play on them. The prizes will vary from money to collectibles, and even to move scrolls. And sometimes, you'll play a different game using the same board styles. What I mean is, sometimes you'll play against an NPC in a best of 3 match. Or maybe it's just you solo trying to see what prizes you land on. And even a game that requires you to win on a board first before you can play on another one. And considering how these boards are laid out, winning on these is much easier said than done. But even something like Lucky Hit here has a lot of depth to it. A lot of time clearly went into developing this. Now, this gambling game is a bit more hit and miss if it really has a ton of depth put into it or not. And the reason I say that is, it's not like there's a lot that can really go into developing the big or small game. You bet money, place it on a spot you think might win, and there are a lot of spots, and have Rio roll the dice and see what happens. 10 or under is small, 11 or higher is big, and you roll 3 dice. There are also spots for getting doubles of dice rolls, like 2 dice being 3 each. This is called a Gideon pair, and there's a spot for getting a triple roll of the same number on all 3 dice called a Y-Sick. The lower the odds, the higher the payout if you not only bet correctly, but also get the roll to follow. Y-Sick being the best in this scenario here. And boy, does gambling in this minigame really help you make a lot of money fast, especially if you save beforehand. But there are apparently a few more gambling games out there, but I never ended up doing them myself, so Big or Small and Lucky Hit are all I can say I've done. Even with those new additions to Shenmue, the sequel does take other mini-games from the first game. Stuff like playing older Sega arcade games makes a very nice return here. This time, we get some new games to play. My favorite thing is being in a building in Kowloon, and you come across an arcade cabinet of Afterburner 2, just sitting there in the middle of the room, with all the lights pointed on it as if it's a gift from the gods. Just something funny I noticed. And just like in Shenmue 1, you can also get a job-like minigame in the sequel, though it's not involved with forklifts this time. Funny enough, it does still involve moving boxes from one location to another. but this time, it's much slower. It involves Ryo and one other person, and is a QuickTime event from hell. This minigame involves just over 20 different QuickTime event moments for each box, and you get $10 per box. All this culminates with a max of 6 boxes at most that I've ever done. That totals out to $60. In terms of time spent on it, it's almost not worth it when gambling exists. Boy, that's one weird thing to say. Gambling is actually profitable in Shenmue 2. What a weird thought. Don't gamble, kids. But gambling aside, there are a few more new types of minigames. Since Ryo is a martial artist, naturally, he'd practice getting better at fighting as the game goes on. Ryo can catch leaves, hit a tree to make leaves fall, and try to hit someone in complete darkness. Even though these minigames happen only once, they are still minigames, and they did end up being fairly fun to do and made it feel like actual martial arts training. Hitting leaves off a tree was the easiest, as it involves a bar and timing the hit properly. Catching leaves has to be the toughest. Just paying attention to the leaves as they fell and watching the camera zoom in was some of the sweatiest gameplay I've had in Shenmue 2. But once you get the 3 leaf catches in a row, it was a great feeling. The next toughest training minigame has to go to hitting the old man in complete darkness. This was called Predictive Explosion, which is also a move that Ryo gets afterward. But it's not really a move. It doesn't have any sort of button combination to put in. And everywhere I looked online, people said getting the move does nothing. I'm wondering if the devs had plans for it in the theoretical Shenmue 3 that they would have made directly after 2 here. Well, after those examples there, the final minigame I found was the various fighting arenas in Kowloon. As you walk up to each of these, you find the main person in the arena, mid-fight with a random NPC. But when you join in, you put money on the line, and you have a minigame of sorts here. One arena has Ryo trying to catch his opponent in less than 30 seconds. Another has Ryo trying to avoid being caught for 30 seconds. And another that Ryo has to survive a fight with someone trying to rush him every move. The way to win this one is to let him push himself out of the ring. All of these arena challenges bring something different to the table. They're a showcase that normal combat isn't the only thing you can do with martial arts. And boy, are there a lot of them. QuickTime events, fighting in someone's blind spot, which, by the way, also involves something we'll talk about here in a bit, and hurting someone in less than 5 hits are also among these challenges. Some of these were tougher for me to do than others, but all in all, they add more to the world of Shenmue. You get to meet some of these characters from different parts of the world, different walks of life, and the challenges associated with them are interesting as well as frustrating. The rest of the gameplay is very similar to the first game. There's a day and night cycle, time passes while you do things, you can interact with quite a lot of objects throughout the world, and so on. Though, I don't think you can interact with as many things as the first game allowed. The first game allowed you to open up and inspect the insides of drawers and closets. Shenmue 2, through a bit of streamlining its pacing, cut a lot of that out. You do still get the opportunity to be a drawer detective, but it's far less often than in a prior game. But as a sequel, it follows the first game well, though it does pick up on combat a lot more than the first. But since we're on the topic of combat in a Shenmue game, let's talk about the combat and its changes from the first game. Back in Shenmue 1, combat was a bizarrely fun mix of traditional 2D fighter, but put into a 3D arena space, one where Ryo can fight one person to facing many opponents at once, all while the battle system has a very surprising amount of depth to it between attacking, defending, and using combos on your enemies to squeak out a victory. Shenmue 2 has all of that, but with some additions and slight changes put in. Since Ryo is attaining new moves, you now have the ability to tell the game which one you would like to use on certain combos. If one move has a specific combination of buttons it's tied to, you might get another that's tied to the same combo. What you do in this instance is go to your move list and hit the left or right arrow to choose which of the 2 moves you want tied to that very combo. This gives us a lot more customizability towards Ryo's repertoire. One could equate this to RPG mechanics in this RPG game. And while we're on the topic of RPG mechanics, just like in the first game, Ryo can make all of his moves stronger the more he uses them. Though, it is a bit tougher to just practice his moves, since I didn't find a single place where Ryo could practice himself, not like how he did in some areas like parking lots in Shenmue 1. This might be one of the reasons why they made those arena challenges replayable for as many times as you want. If you can't practice by yourself, Might as well allow it in combat, I guess. Other than that, dodging and blocking got an addition added as well. Rather than having Ryo just duck down a bit when you hit the button, he'll dodge in a direction, or even dodge roll. If you tap the button at the right time, Ryo will still slap away the attack like a bad habit. Though, I do feel like Shenmue 2 rewards spamming the dodge button more since movement is involved. The normal combat has that same amount of depth to it the first game had, just now Ryo has access to more moves in battle. And to perform a combo, you look at the buttons you have to press. In the move list, left is away from your opponent, and right is toward your opponent. It works exactly the same as the previous game. The combat is still very fun to play, so I'm glad they kept it mostly intact. Mostly. But that said, that's about normal combat. Oh, this upcoming part has some issues in my opinion. So there was a new type of combat added in Shenmue 2, and it's not those minigame arena fights, though it does involve one of them. This new combat has similar functionality to how you fight normally, only this time, you're given this really strange pseudo first and third person view. It acts like you're fighting in first person, but you still see through Ryo's back like he's very translucent. And there are a lot of things I'm not a fan of with this. The first being it's off-putting looking through Ryo as it looks very strange, and you have Ryo kind of making it difficult to see in some instances. Not to mention, it's now far harder to tell just how close you are to your opponent. The depth perception is much harder to understand. And finally, you're now in a sort of first-person viewpoint. You're not hitting left and right for your combos now. It's up and down, with up being toward your opponent and down being away. It takes so much getting used to, but I don't think it was implemented in the best way it could have been. I'd much rather they just stuck to the traditional combat system. I do think I understand one reason why they tried this new system out. For some fights in particular, the arenas are really small. You have walls being really close by, and that could throw off the camera, but I feel it really needed more time in the oven. Now, let's move on to the QuickTime events. Yes, they do make their return here, and with vengeance at that. QTEs are everywhere in this game. It makes it very tough to just set your controller down during cutscenes and the like. These were updated as well. There are times in the crate moving minigame that require you to hit a button up to 5 times in the same direction. These can be challenging when you first come across them, mostly because I wasn't expecting more than once. But they're still easily doable as long as you can keep track of the number of presses. However, there is another addition to the QTE family. It's kind of like a QTE combination. During certain points in the story, or in a minigame, time will freeze, and then you'll see all the major buttons on your controller pop up on the screen. All 4 directional buttons, and the face buttons. In the case of my Xbox controller, A, B, X, and Y. What you'll then see is the game doing a button combination right in front of you, and you're then expected to do the same button combination immediately afterward. While this is an interesting twist on the formula, these can be absolutely tough to pull off. I've had plenty of times where I saw the combo I was supposed to input, and then after inputting the exact combo, it still told me I failed the input. I honestly have no idea what I did wrong on these attempts. I don't know if I didn't press them fast enough, or maybe I was holding a button for slightly too long, or what have you. Regardless, since I beat the game, that means I eventually got past them, so there's that. And for the most part, that's the major stuff involved with QuickTime events. Let's talk about money next. Incredible segue! So, money happens to be a lot more important now than it was in the first game. Unlike in the first game, you don't have Ine-san giving Ryo money every morning. And there's so many things that require money in Shenmue 2 here. At the beginning of the game, Ryo has to pay for a place to sleep, and a few times later in the game will require Ryo to spend a lot of money to continue the story. Although, while money is much more of a necessity now, Ryo also has access to plenty of ways to acquire it. You have the crate carrying job. You can sell collectibles to pawn shops. And gambling. Lots and lots and lots of gambling. And saving right before you gamble. That way, if you lose money, no you didn't. But yeah, gambling is by far the fastest way to get money in Shenmue 2. It beats everything out so easily. Again, don't gamble, kids. So overall, the gameplay in Shenmue 2 is like a natural progression from its predecessor. While that is the case here, it does also have some questionable development choices here. But since this is a 25-year-old game, I'd say it's earned some leniency there. Are some of the changes frustrating? Sure. Did it affect my enjoyment of the game? Absolutely not. Shenmue 2 is still a very fun game to play, and just live in. walking through the world, getting to choose what you want to do when you want to do it, is still a fantastic way to continue the franchise. Being able to simulate life back in the early 2000s was still quite the achievement by Yu Suzuki and the team. Not to mention, putting a working variation of the Virtua Fighter systems into the series too. So many things you can do, and all while following an overarching storyline. Speaking of the story, let's talk about that. The story of Shenmue 2 is in a unique spot here. It's a follow-up to Shenmue 1. That means that where the first game left off from, Shenmue 2 picks up the torch from there. Back in Shenmue 1, the story was fairly slow-paced. You could go about just exploring and living in the world. Nothing felt too high stakes until you got closer to the end of the game. And when I say it was slowly paced, there are a lot of times where Ryo had to ask people where certain things were to further the plot. While Shenmue 2 does that same thing, the first game still felt much slower. The days of Ryo asking where sailors hang out are far from finished. That said, the slower pace of Shenmue 1 really helped the game stand out to me. It was a vibes game, all about the atmosphere and just taking it all in. Enough so that you could actually learn where everything was in the whole map. As for Shenmue 2, while it still has its slower pacing when compared to more current-day games, the pacing of the sequel is much faster than the first entry. You still find yourself having to ask around where certain things are, but in a stroke of genius, the developers allowed you to have multiple things you could ask people about. When asking questions, you might get a potential lead on what you're looking for, but maybe that lead ends up as a dead end. You could continue asking about that new lead, but you could also ask people about the previous question as well. Up to 4 different questions can be available. It absolutely helps to make the game feel bigger in some ways. Another great addition is sometimes an NPC will straight up tell you to follow them to where you're looking to go. Hong Kong is a huge place. I'm guessing the devs decided that giving the players a minimap and NPCs to follow would help with navigating it. But unlike the minimap showing up in your HUD, following NPCs for sure helps with keeping the immersion going. Now, the pacing in Shenmue 2 being faster has an effect on the overall experience. While you can still take your time at each of the maps in Shenmue 2, the faster pacing makes the story feel stronger, something that helps keep you on the edge of your seat during critical moments. While Shenmue 1 was much more skewed towards a slow and methodical approach, that pacing felt right for that game. Shenmue 2's pace also feels perfectly balanced for it. In the case of Shenmue 1, Lan Di was already gone, and Ryo was searching for where he went. Because of that, it felt like more of a detective story of sorts, going from lead to lead, right up to the end of the game. In Shenmue 2, you feel both far away and right on the heels of Lan Di. He could be anywhere. Not to mention how Shenmue 2 has a lot more spots that further the plot, rather than having enemies that run away from Ryo before he got any answer in the previous entry. Both games' pacing is different, but both paces felt right for their respective entries in this franchise. Shenmue 2 is a much more action-packed story, one with Ryo fighting against masters of martial arts. It feels like a natural progression from the typical gangsters and sailors he fought in the previous game. As for the overall story of Shenmue 2, it's exciting, mysterious, and it's overall fantastic. There are so many brilliant moments in the game, and story revelations that lead Ryo further on his journey. After finding out that Lan Di left Japan for Hong Kong in the last game, Ryo gets help to hop on a ship slated for Hong Kong himself. When you first start up Shenmue 2, it begins with him sailing into port, which, by the way, I highly recommend not going above 1080 resolution, because, well, this. Seriously, they put black borders on the right and left, but only so far out? Why? Anyway, Ryo finally steps off the ship, and the player is introduced to the first mechanics in the game, walking forward and then making a decision on whether or not he wants to give money to some street performers. As he continues on, he sees some of the people trying to get him to pay for some simple services, and his picture is taken by a shady guy looking for money. Hong Kong is shown to us to be a shadier place than Yokosuka from the prior game, but this is all foreshadowing for what's to come. Quite literally up next, a kid runs to Ryo asking for help to save him from some thugs. Ryo obliges, sets his bag down, and prepares to fight. Then the kid steals his bag, and the kid and the thugs all run in separate directions. Ryo was gullible enough to be taken advantage of at the very beginning of the game. Ryo now has to walk around asking if anyone saw the people who stole his stuff. This is just the beginning of the game, and we're immediately thrust into the story. While there will be plenty of times where you can just take your time and enjoy the world, This is an example of the story going moment to moment seamlessly. Back in Shenmue 1, there were times where Ryo had to wait for certain cues to occur for the story to progress. If he fought some thugs, they may have gotten away without giving him any extra leads. Stuff like that did happen a lot in the first game, and it further contributed to the slower pacing it had. Shenmue 2, on the other hand, has quite a few of these moments in the game where something major will happen and it's immediately followed up with something else. There's more of a sense of urgency, even if you can take your time. Shenmue 2's story really does flow well, and it has a stronger presence because of it. Like I said earlier, there are multiple locations that Ryo will travel to on his journey through Shenmue 2. Those are the Wanchai district in Hong Kong, Kowloon, and the region of Guilin. Each time Ryo heads to a new location, it's impossible to go back. When you reach Kowloon, you can't go back to Hong Kong. The same goes for when you reach Guilin. The journey moves ever forward, never looking back. Lots of things happen throughout each of these locations, with Guilin being the shortest and most linear. Hong Kong has some great moments in it, like when Ryo meets Ren for the first time. It's one of the times you need to have a certain amount of money, and you can just feel the tension in the air.
May the gods be with you. Oh, all right, you win.
Would you believe me if I told you these two are going to be fast friends? Now, I know I sound like a broken record here talking about the pacing changes, but it really does make a huge difference in how the story is conveyed to us. There's seriously so much that happens in Shenmue 2. It's like if you took all of Shenmue 1 and realized that was like less than a quarter of the size. The main story of Shenmue is Ryo's hunt for Lan Di. Everything after that first moment in the first game is not only a journey to find Lan Di, but it's also for Ryo to grow as a character. All the people he meets along the way help him in some way. Some of them teach him lessons to grow as a person. What Ryo takes from these lessons is for him to figure out. We're along for the ride to see where he goes. And as for the presentation of the story, it's a big step up from the first game. From Ryo first landing in Hong Kong, all the way to one of the most beautiful and climactic fights the series has had up to now. Fighting on a rooftop while the sun is setting. Absolute cinema. But that's not even the ending of the game. I don't want to spoil what happens in the ending, but just know that it's a mammoth-sized cliffhanger. One that fans of the series had to wait almost 2 decades to see what happens next. Lord have mercy on your souls. Honestly, there's only so much I could talk about the story without going into spoilers. So I hope you all get the idea by now that it's fantastic, and I highly recommend it if you're a fan of the first game. With the story out of the way, another thing I wanted to talk about was the music. Just like in the first game, the music here is great and takes a life of its own. It's atmospheric. It helps push scenes even further, and it just straight up helps with the overall vibe of the game. And while the normal combat music in Shenmue 2 doesn't compare with Earth and Sea from the first game, at least in my eyes, there's still a lot here to love. And while I'm not sure on this one, it kind of sounds like Earth and Sea had a remix of sorts in the final boss song in Shenmue 2. Take a listen to them. It's not just me, right? You hear it too? It kind of feels like the soundtrack is evolving along with Ryo. Sega has always had phenomenal musical scores in their games. It was something I always loved about them. The musicians they have are top-tier talent, and I often find myself listening to full soundtracks of their games because it's so good. Shenmue's 1 and 2 are also part of that list of legendary soundtracks. But something I found interesting was there's a lot of music from the games that doesn't actually appear in either game. There was more music made for the series that was just completely unused, maybe in the bonus menus or the solo musical sales and whatnot. But as far as the music goes, it's just as great as the first. Shenmue 2 is a phenomenal game in my eyes. I don't know if I could put it higher or lower than the first game. Both are unique from each other, while also being the same stylistically. It's honestly a real shame, no, a tragedy, that the story was stopped here for the longest time. I know that I can play Shenmue 3 now, but I'm planning on waiting for the recently announced Enhanced Edition to release for that one. This series is a journey for us to experience, just like Ryo, and you can really get a good feel for the old martial arts movies that influenced the series. With the set pieces the way they are, and how influential these games ended up being for the industry as we know it now. There's just so much I love about these games, and the overall Dreamcast vibe these games come with is immaculate. I love going back and playing these older games, seeing what they were like, and finding out just what games they've influenced that came after. Shenmue is a vibes kind of series, and I just know that I'll be playing them for years to come. Now I just need an original Xbox and a copy of Shenmue 2 for it. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you liked the video. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a Shenmue anime to watch. I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Adios.